the real reason why these actors left the Waltons. Every single episode of The Waltons ended the exact same way. The lights went out one by one across that old farmhouse, and voices called goodnight to each other through the dark, and for 9 years, an entire country went to bed feeling like family still meant something. But here's the part nobody talks about. While that goodnight scene was airing every week, warming millions of living rooms, the real family behind it was quietly falling apart. Actors were walking away from one of the most successful shows in television history at the peak of its fame, and the reasons ranged from a secret political nightmare to a stroke that happened during production, to an actress who was cast in a role first and never got to play it at all. Stick around, because the story of who really left the Waltons and why is nothing like what the credits ever told you. The Waltons premiered on CBS in September of 1972, built around the childhood memories of writer Earl Hamner Jr., who grew up poor in the mountains of Virginia during the Great Depression. The show became an instant phenomenon, winning the Emmy for Outstanding Drama Series and turning a cast of relatively unknown actors into household names. At the center of it all was John Boy Walton, the oldest son, the family's narrator, the boy with the notebook who dreamed of becoming a writer. He was played by a 21-year-old actor named Richard Thomas, who won a Primetime Emmy for the role within a year of the show airing. By the mid-1970s, he was one of the most recognizable young actors in America. And then, after 5 seasons, he left. For years, fans assumed there had to be some dramatic falling out. There wasn't, at least not the kind people imagined. Thomas has said plainly, in interviews over the decades, that when he signed his original contract, he decided he would commit to the series for 5 years and no longer, reasoning that was long enough to be tied to one project before moving on to other things. He's also joked, looking back, that at 26 he felt John Boy had grown about as far as the character could go, and it felt like the right moment to close that chapter. The writers handled it by sending John Boy to New York to chase his writing career, which fit the character perfectly. Thomas even returned for a few episodes the following season, and the role eventually passed to actor Robert Whiteman for the final 2 seasons. What's genuinely interesting is what came next, because it complicates the idea that Thomas left chasing bigger stardom. His post-Waltons career was steady and respected, full of stage and television work, but nothing matched the cultural footprint of John Boy Walton. To his credit, Thomas doesn't dodge that. He's spoken with real gratitude about what the show gave him, and he kept coming back for guest appearances, for reunion movies in the 1990s, and decades later to narrate an anniversary remake of the original pilot. It's one of the more honest examples in television history of an actor leaving a defining role on his own terms and then making genuine peace with it, rather than running from it. Now here's where the story gets heavier, because not every departure on this show was a career decision. Some were about survival. Will Gere played Grandpa Zebulon Walton, the rocking chair philosopher of the mountain. Audiences adore him instantly, with no idea about the life he'd lived before. In the 1930s and 40s, Gere had been a serious political activist tied to left-wing labor movements and a personal friend of folk musician Woody Guthrie. When the House Un-American Activities Committee investigated alleged communist influence in Hollywood, Gere was called to testify and refused to cooperate. The consequence was severe. He was blacklisted from mainstream film and television for over a decade, surviving on stage work and small theater jobs while the industry pretended he didn't exist. By the time Gere was cast as Grandpa Walton in 1972, he was already in his late 60s, bringing a lived-in wisdom no script could manufacture. There's a real irony here. A show built around American decency and community was anchored by a man punished by his own government for exactly those values. Gere played the role through season 5 before passing away in April of 1978, while the show was still in production. Rather than force a contrived farewell, the writers made the honest choice to write his death into the story between seasons. Castmates have spoken since about how deeply his absence was felt long after his final scenes wrapped. Then there's Ellen Corby, who played Grandma Esther Walton, the sharp-tongued counterpart to Gere's warmth. Already a veteran character actress, with an Academy Award nomination dating back to the late 1940s, Corby won 3 Primetime Emmy Awards for the role during the show's first several seasons. In November of 1976, During production on Season 5, she suffered a serious stroke that affected her speech and mobility, leaving her return genuinely uncertain. Instead of quietly recasting or writing her out, the production built the stroke directly into the story, letting the Walton family's fear and adjustment become part of the narrative itself. Corby returns starting in Season 7 with a reduced but meaningful presence, and it remains a strikingly compassionate way to handle a real medical crisis happening to a real person mid-production. Michael Learn's story is different, and maybe the most relatable one here. She played Olivia Walton, the mother of the family, so well that she won the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress 4 separate times in 1973, 1974, 1976, and 1979. And after Season 7, she left anyway. The reason she's given over the years isn't complicated. She was simply exhausted. Not tired of the people or the character, but worn down by 9 or 10 months of demanding production every year for 7 straight years. She's spoken warmly about her castmates since, but she's also been honest that the schedule consumed something she needed back. The show wrote her departure by giving Olivia tuberculosis, sending her to a sanitarium, which preserved the character's dignity and left room for Learn's eventual return, both in later episodes and reunion films. Something about the family's emotional center did shift once she stepped away, and it's a useful reminder that 4 Emmys on a shelf don't make a punishing schedule sustainable. Before Learn ever played the role, though, someone else was originally cast as Olivia Walton, and this might be the least known story in the show's history. Her name was Patricia Neal, an Academy Award winner for HUD back in 1963, and creator Earl Hamner Jr. specifically wanted her, believing she had exactly the grounded quality the role demanded. But 7 years before casting began, in 1965, Neal suffered 3 massive strokes in rapid succession while pregnant with her 5th child. She was in her late 30s. The strokes left her partially paralyzed and affected her speech and cognition, and her recovery, pushed through an unusually demanding rehabilitation process, was considered remarkable by the doctors who tracked it. She did return to acting and even earned another Oscar nomination years later. But by 1972, the physical and mental demands of a weekly television drama were more than her health could support, and she withdrew before filming began. Michael Learn stepped in instead. It's strange to think that the Olivia Walton America fell in love with for 9 seasons was shaped, in a real sense, by a medical catastrophe that had nearly happened to someone else entirely. Not every departure was about hardship, though. Some were simply about choosing a different life, and Cami Codler's story is the cleanest example. She played Elizabeth Walton, the youngest of the 7 children from age 6 through 15, growing up almost entirely on national television at exactly the age when most children are just figuring out who they are away from cameras and call sheets. Most child actors face enormous pressure to keep chasing the next role once a show ends, because the industry that shaped their entire childhood rarely makes room for someone who wants to walk away from it completely. Codler did exactly that. Instead of looking for the next series or the next reason to stay visible, she went to college, trained as an educator, and became a teacher, a choice that takes a particular kind of conviction when you're making it from the position of a recognizable face on one of the most watched shows in the country. There's no visible ambivalence in the interviews she's given since, no failed comeback, no gradual fade from the industry. Just a clean, considered exit that most people in her position would have found very hard to make. John Walmsley's path followed similar internal logic. He played Jason Walton, the musical son, across all 9 seasons, and the character's love of guitar and piano reflected the fact that Walmsley was a genuinely trained musician before he was ever an actor. He stayed through the entire run, but once the show ended in 1981, his choices made clear where his real passion had always been. Rather than chase more acting roles, he moved steadily toward music composition and production work, using the visibility the show gave him as a stepping stone rather than an identity. And then there are the quieter stories that never got written into any episode at all. Ralph Waite, who played patriarch John Walton Sr. across all 9 seasons, was privately managing struggles with alcohol during parts of production, something he only became open about in later interviews, long after the series had already ended. He stayed through the entire run, showing up week after week to play steady, dependable strength on screen while quietly dealing with something much harder off it, a kind of discipline that never made it into any script. Later in life, he became an ordained minister, and the faith that had always run quietly through the Walton family's world on screen seemed to take on a deeper, personal meaning for him. He worked consistently after the series ended and remained connected to the Waltons' legacy through reunion projects until his death in 2014 at the age of 85. The younger cast members carried their own weight too. Mary McDonough, who played Erin Walton, has spoken openly about the intense body image pressure she felt as a young actress on a nationally broadcast family show, pressure that led to real health struggles lasting well beyond production. Judy Norton, who played Mary Ellen Walton, has described a version of the same experience, the strange difficulty of being adored publicly as a character while privately figuring out who she actually was. None of it ever made it into a single episode, but it was happening the entire time the cameras rolled. The reunion movies that followed the original series through the 1980s and 1990s brought much of this cast back together, and those productions carried their own particular warmth, the genuine feeling of people who had been through something significant together and found, after time and distance, that the connection between them had genuinely survived all of it, unscripted and real. So, what do you do with all of this once you know it? The Waltons spent 9 seasons telling its audience that family means choosing each other even when things get hard. In a strange way, almost everyone on this list proves that point, just not the way the scripts ever showed it. Richard Thomas left and came back. Michael Learned left and came back. Even the cast members who never physically left carried private battles the scripts never touched, and they showed up anyway, year after year. Maybe that's the more honest version of what the show is actually about. Not a family that never struggled or got sick or got worn down, but one that struggled in ways the cameras couldn't see and chose again and again to come back to each other anyway. That's a harder story than the one told in those goodnight scenes, but it might also be a truer one. If this look behind the Walton family farmhouse gave you a new appreciation for the people who built it, let us know which story surprised you most in the comments below, and subscribe for more deep dives into the real stories behind the shows you grew up watching.